So, welcome to what we call the Novel Idea Society, which is the book club that's based here in Saskatchewan. Victoria, where are you based? I know you're in Scotland, but we have some time change here.
Yeah, I'm in France
Oh, you're
right
in
now.
France
This is
now.
my
Okay.
office in France. My I live in Edinburgh, part-time, and in Denver, Colorado, part-time, and my family lives in France. And so I spend some time in the summer here.
Where are you from?
It's very complicated. I'm born in California, raised in Nashville, Tennessee, but my mom is English, my dad's American, and I moved to Scotland like 5 years ago. But most of the time I'm on tour, like pandemic aside, I would be in like 16 countries a year. So I don't ever know how to answer that question.
Amazing. Before we get started, because I cannot forget, because she will be very upset, my bonus daughter is obsessed with First Kill. So I am supposed to tell you that Amira loves the show. She's 10 and
Oh,
obsessed.
amazing.
So
Amazing.
Amira says she loves your show. So
That makes me very, very happy. So
well, we
thank you.
started watching it over the weekend. Uh, and I said, did you know the lady that created the show? I'm going to have an interview with her this week. And she went, oh, you have to tell her I love her. And I love the show. So
Oh, that makes me so happy.
we will talk a little bit about Netflix and that stuff a little later on.
Great.
But we're
Yeah.
here to talk about The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. People have been telling me for a really long time that I had to read this book. I had picked it up so many times in the bookstore. I went, I'm going to wait for paperback. I'm going to wait for paperback. And finally, I was like, I'm not going to wait for paperback. We're going to read this book. And it was so, so good. And I don't know what I expected. But tell me, where did Addie LaRue come from? Who is Addie LaRue to you?
Well, first of all, thank you. Addie LaRue was a book 10 years in the making. So I got the idea for it when I was 23, and it came out when I was 34, almost 33. And so I always talk about ideas as less like a single object and more like the ingredients in a meal. There's usually more than one. So for me, it's less about like one individual idea and more about when they come together into a cohesive thing. So looking back at the origins of Addie LaRue, I wanted to write an inverse Peter Pan tale where someone is remembered or someone remembers everything but is forgotten by others instead of Peter Pan who forgets his own experiences. And I was thinking a lot about the role of a muse in art, like the forgotten component. As a writer, I spend a lot of time just thinking about like where ideas come from, and somehow like there's an unquantifiable element to creativity. There's always something that makes something click, and so I was thinking about that as a person. I was thinking about like honestly gender swapping a deal with the devil, because often in deals with the devil and immortality deals, they're men and they become immortal and then they move through centuries and they eat everything they want to eat and they meet everyone they want to meet and they screw everyone they want to screw, and then they get existentially bored, and like that's where we meet them. And I was just thinking about the fact that it's what a luxury to have that agency still in immortality, and how if you had a woman who became immortal like Addie does in the 1700s, they would not get to move through the world with the same autonomy. They're still in a female presenting form, and that has limitations. And so really just looking at what changes when you recast a deal with the devil.
So that's the premise that you started with.
Yeah.
How did you start? Like, how did it's a big book. So where did you start and where did you end it? Is the story completely different from where you envisioned it?
So I often talk about an idea is like a glass sphere that you have in your head, right? It's full of light. And then the act of writing it down is the act of smashing that object against a wall and just losing the light and losing the form. And the act of revising a story is like trying to cobble it back together again. And if you do it right, then the light turns on again. And what you end up with as a finished product is never quite the same thing as the idea in your mind, but it's Addie is the closest I've ever come to actually getting back to the glass orb filled with light, but it was very much something done through the revisions. The things that change, it's a big book because it's set over 300 years. And I wanted to make sure that I had an arc for Addie LaRue in the past and an arc for Addie during this 1 year in the present. And so it really is two narratives fused together in that way, kind of braided. But what's interesting is that Addie, Henry, and Luke all changed from initial conception. You know, I had Luke, the devil, in my head, and I thought, well, he's the devil. He's going to be like kind of godly. He's going to be a god, right? He's going to be untouchable. He's going to have the literal like je ne sais quoi element about him. And then I was in university and I was in graduate school and I was studying pantheons. And the thing that always excited me so much about pantheons as compared to like monotheisms, like systems with one god, is that when you have one god, they have to be infallible. They have to be perfect. But when you have many gods in a system like Greco-Roman or Norse, they get to just be totally messed up because they really closely resemble the people that worshipped them. And so once I realized that Luke, my god of darkness, is part of a pantheon, I was like, oh, he's a petulant child. Like that's who you would be if you were that part of the pantheon. And so he changed completely. Also, when I first started with Addie, I assumed she had reached this point of existential ennui. But the issue is that Addie LaRue's deal ends as soon as she wants it to. So if Addie hits the part of ennui that we see in like Lestat, for instance, she would have just tapped out. So instead, I had to write her completely opposite to that. I had to give her this persistent optimism, that thing that gets you through the darkest moments because you know it will get better. And like, that's the thing that she had to have to keep her going over 300 years. She absolutely did not have that when I first created her. And then Henry was just a cutout figure. I had no idea what to do with him. I knew what his role was in the story, but I had no idea how to build him as a person. And it was about 8 years in that I essentially decided to make him me. And I wrote who I would have been if I had never found writing when I did. And that's like, basically, he has the problems that I had, but I found a creative outlet early enough.
That is so happy and so sad all at the same time.
Yeah, I know.
So I have to say, like talking about Henry, that moment where you find out his deal was a year and that he is so far into that year, that moment you feel that like, no moment.
But in your, for anyone who's had anxiety or depression or suicidal ideation, like he says to Addie, I would have given it for a day. Like in that moment when the future seems insurmountable, he has the exact opposite situation of Addie. Addie has this fortitude, emotional fortitude, where she can really get through anything on the promise of tomorrow. And Henry is taken to that dark part, that moment on the roof where he doesn't have that faith. And so for him in that moment, an hour would have been probably nice.
Do you think Addie is an eternal optimist or just really resilient?
Ooh, that's such a good question. I was away from Edinburgh for 16 months during the pandemic. And when I left, I was still revising the novel. And when I came back, it had been out for a year. And I found all of these little Post-it notes, like all over my apartment, that were all for Addie, which was a very surreal time capsule to walk back into. And on one of the Post-it notes, I had written stubborn hope and defiant joy as the things which defined Addie. So I think that kind of falls somewhere. It's not necessarily optimism, but it's a kind of stubbornness, like a stubborn resiliency that almost masquerades as optimism because she has very dark moments. But I think the thing is that when you're looking at the longevity of a grudge, anger will get you only so far and hope has to get you the rest of the way. And so I think that's what it is. For the first 50 years or so, Addie has anger. But when anger burns off, what's left?
Looking at the relationship between Addie and Henry and Addie's deal with the devil and Addie's relationship with the devil and the jealousy there, what were you hoping to get across about love and what the power of how love can change what you're willing to give up?
Yeah. I have kind of here's the thing. This is why I say the readers have their experience, the author has their experience. Because I would argue it's not a love story. I would argue that what Addie has with Luke is lust and what Addie has with Henry is intimacy. And I'm not sure that either one of them is love. Because like I'm not sure that Addie is such a big figure in Henry's life, and Henry is an interlude in Addie's existence.
Right.
And also I don't think you can have a love story between Addie and Luke because of the power dynamic. Because I mean, they have a very complicated entanglement and a very important relationship, because at the end of the day, like he is the one who remembers her, but that's of his own construction. So I'm not sure we can ever forgive Luke enough to like call that love, because there's that power dynamic is never equal. You can argue that Luke becomes more human, but at the same time Addie becomes less human. So I actually do think that in many ways Addie and Luke deserve each other and belong together, because he does point out to her she's not human anymore. She's like holding up this ideal that doesn't actually apply to her. I think that what she has with Henry is lovely and temporary. And so I think that like we have to remember that when Addie meets Henry, he's 29 and she's 323. So like he is at the point in his life where she was when she made the deal 300 years before. And so I think that there's just so many unequal levels to what they're all going through. I think they're all what they need to be for each other. I think Henry is exactly what Addie needs. Addie is exactly what Henry needs. Addie is what Luke needs. In many ways, Luke is what Addie needs. But I don't think that's the same as love.
That's a good point. Do you think that Addie won in the end? Did she beat
Ooh,
the devil with
I
her?
think so. You know, one of the reasons it took 10 years to write was I had to find an ending I could live with. There's a lot of ways to end this story, but there are very few ways to end it where Addie maintains agency. There's a lot of ways to end this story where Henry and Luke both win and Addie is the only one that loses. And I couldn't have that. And so, like, yeah, I actually feel like Addie wins because Addie's playing a long con, but she rewrote the terms of her deal. And like, I think she wins. She doesn't, a lot of people don't think that because she doesn't end up with Henry, but like that's not actually what Addie needs. Addie wanted to have a love story. Yeah. She wanted to experience human love, and she did. But she's in a longer con here with Luke. So I feel like Addie, you know, it's like she spent the entire book handcuffed and she just got one hand free. So I think Addie wins.
I would agree too. I think it feels like she did win. Do you have a particular passion for the arts? Because art factors huge in this story.
Of course. Well, so I have an art degree and I have an art graduate degree, like one in art, one in art history. I have a fascination with creativity. It's not necessarily that I'm like completely enamored with the finished work of art in any case, but I'm kind of fascinated by how anything becomes a finished work of art. I'm always the person who's engaging in the discussions about what art is, about what art means, about what, like how art is made. I'm the one that's always listening to podcasts that's like creatives talking about creating. My entire platform online is like transparency of creativity, because we have this romanticization that happens with the creative. I myself, though, my entire career is creativity. So I think I'm fascinated by it. I'm fascinated by the universals. I'm fascinated by the ways that different arts experience the same psychological dilemmas and the same creative, like I love listening to discussions about like famous musicians and famous actors as well as our authors and artists, because I think that there's a huge amount of commonality to the creative process. So I would say it's the process that fascinates me, because like I'm a fairly mentally orderly person when it comes to creating. I outline, I plan, like I am playing God. I'm not the writer who just like wanders into the abyss for 10 years. Like when I sat down to finally write Addie LaRue, I had basically 300 scene cards and I knew exactly what the scenes were. And I was then executing the scenes for about a year and a half. So I tend to like to be in control. And I think there's an element to creativity that is anarchic and like slightly difficult to define. And I think that I both loathe that and am fascinated by it. So I'd say that it's the process of creating art especially as someone who goes through the exact same psychological turmoil with every single book. Like every single book, I'm like, I don't know how to do this. I can't do it. It won't come together. And then it does. And I just repeat the cycle. So I think I just have I'm consumed by a fascination with the creating of art.
Tell me about the seven freckles then, the seven stars. Is that just his distinguishing feature? Was that your creativity within the creativity? Like what's with the seven? What's with the seven?
Well, seven's my favorite number. I'm born on July 7th, so sevens follow me everywhere. But with Addie, it was very much based in how I was going to have her be a muse because I needed to give her a concrete feature that could be interpreted across both realistic and abstract art. Because I knew that I was going to have abstract artists as well. And so it's like, okay, well, when we abstract Addie, what's something that we can use to kind of anchor her into that piece of art so that we as the reader still know, but that was inspired by her. Like you might not be able to think about art and inspiration is you can very rarely track it back. Like there's such a massive chasm between an idea in someone's head and the finished work. That like I just wanted a thread to be able to hold us back and say, okay, well, there are seven stars in that abstract sky that, Samantha does. Therefore, we can still see it's Addie, or only we know. It almost becomes like a wink and a nod. It's the insider element for her. So I knew it's just one of those things she always had because I knew it was always going to become a visual shorthand that I could give to the artists.
Amazing. Okay. I did ask people if they had questions for you. So I'm going to ask those before I forget and we run
Sorry,
out
I
of
got caught in a
time.
rainstorm right before this, and it is definitely taking a toll on the hair.
Oh, that's fine. Which character do you identify most with through their journey? I imagine the loneliness felt by both has to come from personal experience at some point, and that's from B.
Henry, like I say, Henry's me. Henry's scenes were the hardest to write. Henry's the only character I've ever written that I feel like personally affronted when people don't like him because I've never written myself into a character that much before. Yeah, Henry, I kind of gave all of my mental health to. I didn't intend to, it just kind of happened that way, and I feel very protective of him because of it.
Okay, next question is from Jennifer. She says, started yesterday and I'm halfway through. It is captivating and really hard to put down. I would love to know what was your inspiration for the premise of the novel and why begin in 1700s France?
Well, as I said, my family lives in France. I actually set the novel about 10 minutes from my parents' house for Addie. In some ways, I really wanted to explore. Well, I had to set her into a location that she would be able to travel outward from by degrees. So I picked my time period because 300 is a nice number, and I think that 3 centuries gives us 3 acts of her existence. So the time frame came first. I was like, okay, 2014. 1914, 1814, 1714. Track it back. But in terms of place, she's a hedonist. The thing that bonds her to Luke from the very beginning is they both have an appreciation of beauty and art, a romanticization of it. And I do think that that's quite French. This pleasure in living. I think it's something that bonds them. I also wanted to set it someplace that I could kind of fringe it on New World versus Old World religions and the kind of local faith versus the encroaching, like kind of royal faith and all of its guilt and glamour. So there were a lot of factors. I could have easily made her Scottish or English based on where I live and my own identity. And I knew that she would travel outward to these places, but I just kind of always had her French. And like I say, I've spent time in France since I was in my early teens. I spend probably 3 months a year here in France. And so it was just kind of a little bit of a love letter to this culture that I'm enamored by. And I think people have a sense of French culture and it's a very Parisian thing, but the culture in the French countrysides is so intimate and so lovely. And so it was really a letter to that.
Well, that's so nice. Next question. Angela would like to know, do you know how your stories are going to end when you start them?
Yes, every single time. I actually don't start writing a novel until I know exactly how it ends. So 22 books in, that has never changed. Like I'll rewrite a ton of the book, but for me, the ending is the last taste in your mouth. It's like the whole point. It's the thing we're working toward. And so until I not only have an ending, but my ending can't just be a placeholder. It has to be an ending that I am deeply invested in reaching. Until I have that, I don't actually start writing the novel. It's kind of like how I know I'm ready to write it. And also, it's because I'm an anxious person who is always trying to convince myself to quit. And so, if I have an ending that excites me, then on good days, I'm writing toward it with, abandon. And on bad days, I won't quit because there's a finite distance between here and there.
So do you start at the end and work your way backwards, or do you plot like chunks or chapters, or what does your outlining process look like?
Oh, it's both very messy. I sound much more orderly than I am. I live in this kind of controlled chaos. But no, I plan as much as possible. And I don't usually like necessarily write the last scene, but I have like almost tiny little paragraphs for every chapter. So I know what the visual moment that I'm ending on is. For Addie, it was the bookstore. Like I knew. So I needed to know for Addie not only like the bookstore where that last scene takes place, but I needed to know obviously how the last deal kind of sorts itself. So really like both the end of the emotional arc and the last page physical end of the physical arc.
That's amazing. Okay, I think there's one more question here. Obviously you've touched on this a little bit because it's personal experience, but Amanda wants to know, what kind of research did you do before starting writing this book? Or extra research, I guess.
So much research. Like what's amazing. I mean, so basically when I say I worked on Addie for 10 years, you have to understand that I got the idea for it before my first novel, The Near Witch, hit shelves in 2011. And so for the 19 books that came out before Addie, I was touring the world. I was traveling and promoting, and Addie was this constant passenger for me. So I would go to Prague, and I would go to Vienna, and I would go to, Portugal and Spain and Scotland. And everywhere I went, I would ask myself, like, what would Addie notice? What would Addie see? So I would do several pages of research notes every single place I went to and every single moment. So every physical location in the book is somewhere that I went. So that was really the most of the research. I still got things wrong. There are things that are hopefully fixed in the later versions that it just goes to prove like you can try your absolute utmost. The worst mistake, because it's not a lazy mistake, but like there's so much in that book. My favorite, I think it exists in the galley. So anyone who got an ARC, I'm so sorry. And I think it was in the very first printing. And unfortunately, the very first printing for Addie LaRue was like 100,000 copies. So is that I was so convinced that, what's it called? That there's a church at the top of Montmartre. And I was so convinced that that church had existed when I had Addie go there with Remy. And it did not. It was made like 100 years later. And so I moved it to Notre Dame. But in the original version, they do not go to Notre Dame together. They go to the top of the steps.
Sacre-Cœur, right?
Yeah, it's Sacre-Cœur. And like Sacre-Cœur has the atmosphere of a place that has existed long enough.
I have been there. It does.
It was made in the mid 1800s. And she goes there in 1720 something. And I was like, God damn it.
Damn it.
And so I had to rewrite the entire scene to Notre Dame. But I was like, that was one that I was like, I have 5 editors. I have how many editors, copy editors, and proofreaders? And it got to like a French person reading the ARC and being like, this is not real. And I was like, so you can try. There are just so many details. But I do my best.
Are you, so that this book is very personal to you then, because it is your travels, it is your personality, it is 10 years of your life. So it must feel good that there is so much amazing feedback. Like this book is not in paperback yet, and it's been out for a long time.
I know it's not coming out in paperback until next March.
Like that's amazing for a hardcover to stay on a shelf that long as hardcover.
Yeah. For anyone who doesn't know, paperbacks usually come a year after the hardcover. The issue is that you want to drop the price point for a new accessibility. But if a hardcover is selling very well, the publisher will delay the paperback because they obviously want to get as much out of the hardcover as possible because it's a higher price point. And yeah, it will be a full, like, it'll be a very long time before I'm trying to remember October 2000. It'll be 2.5 years for the hardcover. I'm honestly, I'm really grateful because my audience, my readership has grown a lot over the last 12 years that I've been writing, but my readers tend to come to my books slowly. And that's fine with me. I'm like prepared for that. I have this like very slow and steady thing. So for a book like Addie to come out and have sold like 1 million copies in its first year, I was just like, oh, is that a thing that happens? Like so I'm incredibly grateful. And I just hope that as it comes out into paperback, even more readers discover it and discover Addie's story. Because considering it's a story about memory and being forgotten, every reader that I meet that says like, well, now you know Addie will always be remembered, I'm like, my feelings right there.
Amazing. Okay, I know we're on a time crunch here. I want to talk to you a little bit about, because you have to go, correct?
Yeah, I have
Here?
a Ukrainian, I'm doing a Ukrainian charity event in 3 minutes. So we have 3 minutes.
I just want to talk to you quickly about Netflix and First Kill and getting in. So you have all of the success with your books, and then Netflix knock, knock, knock says, hey, we want to turn you into a show.
Well, it started back in 2019. So I wrote this short story called First Kill in 2019. I wrote it kind of as a favor to a friend for a vampire anthology. So I thought, oh, I'm going to write like a TV pilot is really like an easy adaptation from a short story. They kind of perform the same way. And so I just basically wrote the like gay teenage vampires I wish I'd had when I was 16. And yeah, it sold in like a 12 studio auction to Netflix. I wrote the pilot, and then, which is like the script, there's a huge chasm between like the story, the pilot that I wrote, and like what's actually on screen, because there's just like a lot that happens in between those things. But wrote the pilot, Netflix greenlit the show, which essentially means they gave us an 8-episode order in 2020, and then started a writer's room, virtual writer's room. And then we started filming in March of last year, and the show came out 2 weeks ago almost. Yeah, that's a thing that happened. I don't know, it's like a complete loss of creative control. Like I am so used to being the god of my little world. And it's definitely like both a blessing and a curse. Like it's such a cool creative experience, but at the same time, my name is on this thing that like I don't actually have control over.
Oh, that's wild.
So it's hard as someone who like has complete control over my books. There'll be like a line in the pilot that I didn't write, but it got added in. And I'm like, but I didn't write that. But my name is on it, like I did write that. And so it's weird. I'm very, very, very grateful for it, but I'm also very glad that TV stuff is my icing and not my cake.
Absolutely. Okay. We could very clearly talk for a long time, but I do not want you to be
I
late
know.
for your charity
I
event.
would love to.
What's the one book you would tell everyone they need to read right now, yours or otherwise, that you would
Oh,
recommend?
well, it's now I'll look like a jerk if I say one of mine.
First thing that pops into your head.
Okay. Lessons in Chemistry. Bonnie Garmus. I maybe the best book I've read in years. My entire family read it, and every member of my family loved it.
Amazing. Thank you so much for this.
Awesome.
I appreciate your time so much.
Thank you.
And I will share
It was
this
so
with
nice
Book
getting
Club.
to chat with you.
And I just appreciate your work and your time and everything. And good luck at the charity event.
Thank you. And this was such a joy. I could talk with you forever.
Well, I appreciate that so much. Have fun and enjoy Friends.
Thank you.